Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we will begin in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." So where we left off in the last installment, I went over the first three verses of chapter 8, where it tells us that Samuel's sons Joel and Abijah are judges placed over the people by Samuel himself in his old age, but they did not walk in his ways. They were looking after dishonest gain. They're taking bribes. They're perverting justice. They're looking for everything that, like Eli's sons, would satisfy their flesh, not satisfy the will of the Lord, which is what Samuel was always looking to do, was to do well by the Lord, to have his life lived solely for the Lord. And his sons obviously weren't. His sons, somewhere along the line, left the teaching he had instilled in them and the example he had shown before them, and went away from that and walked in rebellion, and walked fully away from the teachings he had instilled in them. And it's one of those things that makes us wonder. As much as we as Christians and Christian parents are teaching our kids, what are we walking out in front of them? We teach them the Word of God. We show them the Word of God. We tell them what we expect from them in their walk with God. But are we showing it to them? We don't, as I said before, we don't know what Eli did. We do know he was punished along with his sons because he did not rebuke his sons in their wickedness, which means he knew to an extent. The way the people are coming up against Samuel makes it seem as though Samuel might not know the dishonesty and the vileness that his own children are getting into. And now, because of that, these people are looking for a king. They've been looking for a king as long as they've had a nation. With Joshua out of the way, they wanted Gideon as a king. And he didn't want to be a king, but they made an idol out of his ephod that he made and should never have had. Then Jephthah was almost the king of his tribe. And with each inkling, you get closer to people wanting a king, wanting a ruler over them, wanting to be like all the other nations, not set apart, as was their calling as God's chosen people, but wanting a king over them, like everyone else, just a man, just a person. And that's something that we want, because we want something tangible. We wish to see X person president because he's going to make us better. He's going to make the nation great again. He's going to bring forth better justice, as we see justice. But no man will ever be the true ruler of anyone in this country, this world, because we have a King of Kings and a Lord of Lords. For the moment, he resides with the Father at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for us, while the adversary, our enemy, reigns down here as a faux king over this wicked fallen world. But our king will return. A king that the Israelites had to look forward to as well. And they had a king over them. They had God ruling and raising up leaders and leading them out of oppression to bring them further from the world every time they tried to take 2 steps into it. But now they want a man. They want a man like everybody else. Because Samuel's sons were wicked. And they were being left without Samuel. I mean, we know he will continue to live for quite a number of years yet. But he's old. They want a king like everybody else because they see who is being left in line as judges. They see these people in the horizon, not understanding that whether Samuel calls his sons judges or not, it'll be the Lord who will be the one raising up the next judge. They're already treating Samuel as if he's a king. They're treating Samuel as if he has a lineage to leave behind in his sons. We see you're old, you're going to go on to be in Abraham's bosom. And then your sons who don't walk in your way are going to rule over us. But it wouldn't be that. It would be whoever God raises up next. And they fail to see that. And because they fail to see that, we get to verse 6. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." So Samuel prayed to the Lord. See, he understood that Samuel isn't looking at himself as the leader of the Israelites. He's seeing himself as Moses saw himself, not as the ruler, but as the tool with which the Lord is using to judge and lead his people. Just the person in the moment, not the king, just the tool. Regardless of what we do in life, no matter how great it is, we are only the tool being used. And that's true of any human being. They will allow themselves to be led by the Lord, led by their selfish desires, or led by the adversary. As Christians, we give the adversary way too much credit. We give him and his demons way too much credit. The devil is not omniscient. He is not omnipotent. He is not omnipresent. The devil is one being in one place at one time. He is not a demonic Holy Spirit. He does not have that power. He wishes he did. And when we look at human wickedness and say that needs to be demonic, sometimes we underestimate the wickedness of the hearts of men. Because mankind is plenty wicked on its own without the demonic possession, demonic influence in the lives of people. That just adds to it. There are times I see the news and I go, that was definitely demonic. And then I'll hear a Christian speaking and saying, well, the devil is on top of us with this. And I think, no, you just have a really crappy boss. Because he's fallen and seeking after the lusts of his flesh. You don't need the devil for that. We do that well enough all on our own. And Samuel's seeing that in these people. Seeing that they want the flesh. They want not to be set apart, but to join the rest of the world. And it's a sad place that we end up. Thinking that someone else is going to get us out of a situation when the true king is the one who will get us out. We are simply tools, whether we're tools for good or evil, because the Lord will allow us to go the evil route and will use our wicked hearts the same way for his end. Will he allow bad things to happen? Yes, if that ultimately ends up in good. Well, that's wrong and wicked and evil of God. Well, you don't know the ways of God. And for people who in our wickedness always look at the ends justify the means, you don't know what God's ultimate plan is. God's ultimate plan is to save as many people from the abyss as possible, to give as many people that opportunity as possible. And when somebody goes out and does something wicked, there's some mass shooting, there's some mass stabbing, there's explosions. The Lord already knows where each of those people were going to end up. He knows that the people that were never going to love him, who were always going to rebel from him, were never going to accept submission under the name of Christ. He already knows where they end, where their heart lied. Their death was not taking away an opportunity from them, because their time had come and they had not heeded the call to that point. If they are a believer, if they are born again, if they are a Christian, if they do submit to Christ, then he's simply welcoming them home. Might not be in the way they wanted, but it's still the destination they dreamed of visiting and being in forever. We don't get to judge the Lord. The Lord judges us. His ways are perfect because we can't see the ultimate plan. The ultimate plan is outside of our scope of knowledge because we live such finite periods of time, and we're not capable of pulling out far enough to see the path that the plan takes, and the branches it takes, and the perfection of it. One day we will know it. We still won't know everything there is to know about an infinite, omnipotent, omniscient, all-knowing God. But we'll know what that plan was. We already know it's for Christ to save us and bring us into communion with him. But to finally see it run out to its completion, that will be a thing to know in the future. Something to behold. But here you have people who want a man again. We want a man. We don't want God. We can't see God. We can't touch God. We took the ark in the battle 20 years ago, and we lost it. We want a man to lead us in the battle. Because they don't understand the situation they're in, the responsibility they have, and just how blessed they are to be that chosen people. So Samuel prays to the Lord, displeased because he wants to hear from the Lord. So often since the time of Judges, we see people not seeking God. Ever since that book began, we see people not seeking God through Judges, through Ruth even in the beginning, with Naomi and her husband not seeking the counsel of God, but moving out to Moab. Now we get to Samuel, 8 chapters deep, and still rarely seeking anyone, looking towards God, seeking his face, outside of one woman, Hannah, crying out to the Lord to have a son who would judge Israel, and who is now making this prayer on behalf of his people, because they're about to make a grave, grave mistake. And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. As Christ would tell his followers, they hate you because they hated me first. And because they hate me, they will hate anyone who follows me. So the Lord's telling Samuel, they're not upset with you. They love the way you led them. They're not rejecting what you've done. They're rejecting my kingship because they want to be as the world is. And as I've said 1,000 times, the Lord allows us to choose. He allows us to choose poorly. Because he's our Father, he loves us. And with love comes having to let people have the free will to make their own choices. And sometimes when it comes to your children, you need to let them off the leash to make their own mistakes. You need to let them climb those monkey bars the wrong way and let them fall. That way they learn not to do it again. You can't bubble wrap your kids from the world. You can't bubble wrap them from wickedness. You can do your best to keep them safe, but ultimately, the older they get, the less control you have over what they choose, what they do, and you have to trust in them to make the right choices. God, omnipotent as He is, not that He can't affect our free will, because if He wanted to, He could snatch it from us in a heartbeat. But He never will, because He is perfectly loving and perfectly just. And He's about to give these Israelites a taste of tough love that will stick with them for generations. The Lord said to Samuel, "Heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since this day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them, and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them." Saying, just as they've turned from me time and again to serve other gods, to play the whore, play the harlot with these idols, they're now doing the same thing to you. But it's not you they're rejecting, it's me. So if they really want to be out from underneath my hand of protection, from under my roof, from out of my house, then let them go. However, you're going to warn them. You're going to tell them exactly what a king is going to be like. You're going to now prophesy over them what the king is now going to be like, whether they believe it or not. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king, so all those elders of the people. And he said, "This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you." Now, he will repeat a lot of these things once again when he has the entire assembly of the people, so to speak, around him. Here, it's just the elders who came to seek him to tell him they wanted a king because his sons were wicked. So this is his first time saying this to a much smaller audience. So whether they disperse this word onto their own people, we don't really have that at the moment. He's not speaking to the larger audience, just to the smaller people who came, the elders of the people. And he said, "This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots." Saying, your king is going to take your sons. The Lord wanted your firstborn, but he allows you to redeem them because he took the Levites. This king is going to take your own sons, whether you like it or not, because he's going to have dominion over you. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s, and will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. And he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. And he will take 1/10 of your grain in your vintage, and give it to his officers and servants. And he will take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men, and your donkeys, and put them to his work. And he will take 1/10 of your sheep, and you will be his servants. And you will cry out in that day because your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. The Lord has his requirements of you, but this is what a human king is going to do. He is going to do everything he can to enrich himself, to enrich his kingdom, to enrich his lineage. Not for you, but for him. And when you finally realize the burden this person is putting on you, that he is stealing your children to be his servants, He is marrying away your daughters. He is taking them into his house. He is creating servants of your children. He is taking your livestock, your grain, your food out of your mouth to pay for his wars. He is taking your taxes and doing what he wills with it while you struggle to make ends meet. And when you finally figure that out in that day, you're going to cry out to the Lord. And the Lord is not going to hear you in that day. Not that the Lord won't hear, but that the Lord won't act. Because you have brought this upon yourselves. This is what you wanted, and the Lord is graciously giving it to you. But there will come a day when you wish you didn't have what you wanted so badly. You wanted this, you're going to get it. And soon enough, you're going to wish you never had it. Because oftentimes when we wish for things, we want the idea of the thing, not the actual thing itself. They're envious of the other people and their kings. And they're looking at it with rose-tinted glasses about all the things their kings do for them to keep them safe and expand their borders and cut a powerful figure. But they're not looking at the reality of what a king brings and the pressure a king puts on his people. Because the moment you have a king, you don't become citizens. You cease in that function. Right now, they were citizens of this promised land of the Lord. They were all equals before the Lord. They all had their role to play. The second you put a man king on the throne, all of a sudden you have someone who seeks only what is best for them. And you cease being a citizen and become a servant and a serf. We are all under someone and something. We all have to deal with that reality. Everyone serves something. There's no true secularism. There's no true atheism. Everyone follows a religion of some kind. Secular people, atheists, they always cry out the same cry. Always. Progressives especially will always make the same cry. You want to be on the right side of history. When history books are written and look back on this, you don't want to be on the side of X, you want to be on the side of Y. Because that's where the good people are. Because they view history as a form of deity. They view time as a form of deity. What formed the land? Time. What formed human beings? And our minds and our wills and our free will and our consciousness? Time. History and time. Given enough time, anything can happen. So at the end of time, the great history will be able to look back and see who the good people are and the bad people were, and be able to judge them appropriately. They have a deity. Time itself is their deity. Written history is their deity. Not knowing that written history changes. They'll say that the Egyptians have no written records of the Israelites escaping them and defeating their army. No, because most ancient historians, kings, didn't keep notice of their military failures. They'll mention that they had a skirmish, but they won't mention the outcome of it unless it's a win. So you're just left to, I don't know, maybe. So often things in the Bible are denied because history hasn't borne them out. Genesis can't be real because our mighty God of time can possibly, if we manipulate the facts enough, possibly be a reasonable explanation to cover up creation. Possibly. Maybe. When Charles Darwin was coming up with his theory of evolution, even though it's really not his, but when he did Origin of Species, during that time frame, the appendix was considered a vestigial organ. It's an aberration of evolution. It served a function in the past. Doesn't have one anymore, and we don't even know what its original function was. That's why you can remove it and still live a happy, healthy life. Because it's something that our cave ancestors had or our great ape ancestors needed, and we don't need it anymore. We were taught that in the 80s and in the 90s. There are people who still parrot that now, that's a vestigial organ. Only recently the science has caught up to human anatomy in certain cases, not fully, because no one still fully understands most of what the human body does. But we've learned that the appendix has a reason to be there even now, and that it promotes good gut health along with probacteria in, good bacteria in your gut. It stores it. Now, can you survive without it? Sure. You can survive without one lung, but that doesn't make one of your lungs vestigial and not necessary. You can survive without one kidney, and half a liver, but that doesn't make the other half of the liver or your second kidney vestigial. You can survive with one hand, one leg, one eye. Just because you can survive without it doesn't mean it doesn't have a purpose, even if you don't fully know what that purpose is. Because just because we don't know something doesn't mean it's meaningless. All the time, people get confused about what God is and what God brings forth. I don't believe in a God. You do. You just don't believe in the real one. Well, which God's the real one? The one you seem to hate the most. The one you can't stand. The one that brings forth burning anger in your heart every time you hear his name. The one who you will deride his followers all day long without ever knowing them. Because you kind of once saw a Christian acting bad. As if we are the source of the religion. We are not Christ. We try to follow his walk, and imperfectly so, fall on our faces. Because we're not him. And we never will be. One day we hope to be cloaked in his righteousness, to be as close to him as possible. But even then, we will not be him. These Israelites are choosing a man over the Lord. And because of that, when they come to that realization, the Lord will not act on their behalf. He's given them over. The warning has been given now to these elders, to these leaders. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, "No, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." So all they see is the promise of something good, not the reality of the situation. All they see is the hope of it. All they see is the visible benefit of something they've been dealing with and having already working in their favor invisibly. Because they're not quite able to see what is truly going on around them. For all these centuries, they've allowed their hearts to harden. They've allowed themselves to become blind to the truth of just how blessed they are. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So he went back to the Lord in prayer again, repeating word for word as if God hadn't heard it. Pouring his heart out to the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, "Heed their voice and make them a king." And Samuel said to the men of Israel, "Every man go to his city. Give them their king." He told everyone to go back to their city. He would do as they wished. You wanted a king? I'll give you a king. And all because they didn't understand the blessing that it was to be God's chosen people, to be the bearers of God's great redemption plan into the world. The Jews today, like the Jews then, need Jesus Christ for salvation. They don't get around that by being God's chosen people. But by being God's chosen people, they were specially set aside from all the peoples of the world. Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. Jacob I loved, I gave this special duty. I picked these special people to have this special responsibility above all people, to bring forth the salvation of all humanity. These people who are to be separated from everyone else, to live separate for me and me alone. I have these people that are going to reconcile the world back to me. The first Adam caused them to fall. This second Adam that will come from these chosen people will bring a reconciliation from those who choose love where Adam chose rebellion. And these people can't see that because they're caught up in the day-to-day material world that we live in. They were caught up in the creation and couldn't see the plan of the Creator. They wanted what their flesh desired instead of doing what His will had for them. So our prayer should always be to do His will. It sounds like the most obvious and simple and dumb thing to say at the end of a study. But that should be our prayer, to do His will. To be His will be done. Not to get caught up in our bills and get caught up in our financial need, our work needs, our our household needs, but to do his will so each of those things lines up. Because he provides. And when our heart is for him, when he is our Lord, he told the people through Samuel, you will turn to me after you put your trust and your faith and your hope in this man you wanted to lead you. Which we're in an election year. We still have people doing that. Kamala Harris is the nominee for a Democrat, so that man or woman to lead them. People are still doing it. But the Lord's telling them, if you put your hope and prayers and everything in them, I'm not going to act. I'm not going to hear you because I come first. And when we have him over us, when we are submitted to him, he will hear and he will act, not in what we want, not in what we want him to provide, but in what is best for us. What he sees is best, what he knows is best. And he will bring forth abundance. I always have to temper that by saying, not what we wish, but by what he wills. And we are in his will, walking in his way. He provides what we need to accomplish what he will have us accomplish. Even if it takes us in the complete opposite direction that we thought we wanted to go in to begin with. These people are chasing their own fleshly desires, their own lusts, their own envy of others. And the Lord's going to let them make that mistake. And it's going to be a mistake that will snowball for centuries. But for those who never lose sight of the Lord and his plan, the Messiah will eventually come from that chosen people, set forth to be his tool to bring forth reconciliation. What tool are you? What tool am I? What plan does he have? What purpose does he have for us? Seek his will, and we'll be led to figure out whatever it is he wishes us to do. So that's where we shall end it for this morning. I hope this was fruitful for you. I hope to see you back again next time. But until then, be blessed.